I'm David Bosco, Associate Professor in the Department of International Studies in SGIS, and the course I'm teaching is Diplomacy, Security, and Governance. I think there's a lot of lack of understanding about the basic organizations and institutions that we have for dealing with international security. And I think it's critical to fill that information gap because it really matters to people as citizens, as individuals, that they understand how these institutions and organizations and rules work. So diplomacy, security, and governance is going to focus on one of the big questions in international relations, which is how do we maintain peace and security in the world? And we're going to look at the history of conflict between states and also within states. And we're going to look at different ways in which diplomats and leaders and international organization officials have tried to wrestle with the problem of violence in the international system. And we're going to look at diplomatic efforts to try to control violence. We're going to look at legal efforts, ways in which international law has been constructed to try to prevent or deal with conflict if it happens. And we're going to look at some of the institutional ways in which the world has tried to build institutions and organizations that can restrain violence. We're going to spend a lot of time looking at the United Nations, but also some other organizations, including NATO, the International Criminal Court, and the International Court of Justice. So in trying to understand the history of the world's attempts to deal with international security, one of the things that we're going to look at is, the transition, for example, between the Cold War period, so from 1945 up through 1989 or 1990, when international politics was really structured around the conflict between the West and the Soviet Union. And that had huge impacts on how people approached international security, how international organizations could function or not function. We're going to watch and kind of examine that transition from the Cold War to the post-Cold War and what that means for dealing with international security. And we're not just going to look at conflict and violence, we're also going to look at other ways in which states and non-state actors have tried to cooperate to deal with international security issues. Because international security isn't just about war, it's also about how do we manage a problem like climate change? How do we manage problems like pollution? Those are security issues in many respects, and we're going to spend some time looking at those issues as well. I think the one thing I'd like students to take away from this course is a deeper historical understanding of conflict and international attempts to deal with conflict and international security. Because there is a tendency in today's world to be very focused on the problems that we have today, and sometimes to be kind of overwhelmed by those problems. But that can lead to a kind of paralysis, which I think is not very helpful. And I think an understanding of some of the ways in which the international community has dealt with, sometimes successfully dealt with problems in the past, will provide a better historical context for students, and I think will provide them with the sense that while there are big problems, progress is also possible.